It's episode 3 of LSQ. Hey, it's Jenny LSQ, and this is my podcast featuring monthly interviews with musicians, songwriters, producers, music people in general. If you didn't get to check out either of the first 2 episodes, they're available for you to download at your leisure, and please do subscribe if you like what you hear. Episode 1 was a conversation with Amelia Meath of Sylvan Esso, plus, from my interview archive, a bit of a 19-year-old Beyonce. And then episode 2 had Aaron Dessner of The National, as well as an archival clip of Missy Elliott. This month, you'll hear my conversation with the exceptionally cool Britt Daniel, frontman for indie rock giant Spoon, who last year made one of my favorite albums of 2017, and I think one of the best in their catalog, in the form of their ninth studio LP, Hot Thoughts. And in this conversation that you're about to hear, Britt and I talk at greater length than I ever had the chance to interview him before, about his childhood growing up and first becoming interested in playing music, about his high school band, the Zygotes, about an era in the late 90s when he thought about giving it all up, and a whole bunch more. Plus, after the interview with Britt, you'll get from the archive some Lars Ulrich of Metallica talking about why the band decided to sue Napster in the year 2000 when peer-to-peer file sharing was exploding. More about that coming up. Right now, Britt Daniel on LSQ.
Hey, are we on?
We are.
Awesome.
It's happening. So we're here in New York at the Hotel Rivington, where Spoon are in town playing a few shows this week in the area. Have you ever lived in New York?
Closest I came to living in New York was, well, I've come for months at a time. And the last time was a couple years ago. But in 1999, I lived here for 5 months.
All right.
And,
what part of town were you in?
I started out in Long Island City, and it was just like Beirut at that time. It was not pretty.
Yeah.
But it was cheap.
What brought you here for 5 months?
I used to try to always get out of Austin for the summer. And I think the summer before that I was in Chicago. I mean, I didn't necessarily go to places that were a lot cooler,
right?
Because it was a brutally hot summer in the summer of '99. But I just came up here to get away for a bit and to write. But I ended up not writing much because I was, hustling, trying to make money.
That was after the first Spoon record?
Yeah, it was after the second Spoon record. We put out a record on Elektra in '98, and we got dropped almost immediately afterwards. And this was the summer after that.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So that must have been an interesting period of reappraisal for you.
Right. We had an early version of Girls Can Tell done, and right as soon as we finished it, I went to New York and tried to find someone to put it out while I was up here.
Wow. So what did you think? I mean, if you can remember what your frame of mind was at that time, what did you think the future of Spoon was?
I didn't know if it was going to continue to exist. I kind of felt like we might be out of the record-making club forever, but or at least unless it was self-released or something. And I was a bit bummed right then. I didn't know. I was pretty broke, and I felt like we had a lot of promise and potential that didn't really work out on those first 2 records. I thought the second record at least was quite good.
Yeah.
And but that not a lot of people, the business hadn't worked out for us, But
were all the eggs in that basket by then? I mean, you were counting on this band or being in a band to work?
Yeah, that's what I quit my job to go do. Yeah, and then once we got dropped, then I tried to go get that job back. I found out that wasn't possible.
What was the job?
I was working at a video game company before,
okay.
Which was just like it was the greatest job, making sound effects for video games. It was amazing. A really good culture at that company, so it was just sort of, everybody was pretty loose. And
so making sound effects like Foley type sound effects things?
Sometimes just manipulating sound effects from sound effects CDs,
Wow.
Lots of explosions.
Cool.
Engines.
And how had you gotten that job? I mean, did you study anything like that, or?
I studied audio production at school, and then right out of school, I got that job. I think that, people like to hire people that are right out of school and mold them.
Yeah.
And so I applied right at the right time, and there certainly were more qualified people probably in Austin, but I think they liked the idea that I had just gotten out of school.
And so that was right after you got out of UT.
Yeah.
Yeah. But when you decided to enroll in engineering in college, was that at that point, were you already kind of hoping to parlay that into the legitimate version of starting a band?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the whole idea of, going of school at all was just to bide my time, until I could get a band together that I felt could do something,
Right.
So the whole time I was in school, I was trying to put together bands, finally put together a couple bands. And that was what I really wanted to do. And, and I definitely, that's where my energies went.
And what were your hero bands at that time? Or who was doing it at a level that seemed achievable but awesome when you were just sort of fresh out of college?
Fresh out of college. I mean, going into college, the Pixies were my favorite band. The Velvet Underground. I guess they weren't really doing it right then. But Right.
But
those were big, big bands. And they were weird bands that, the Beastie Boys came out with that hit, but when they started with Paul's Boutique, and they made some weird records that were really, really creative, and their popularity took a nosedive, and then they came back.
So what was the first weird music that you liked as a kid? What was the first thing you found that felt like a discovery that wasn't what everyone else was into?
Well, the art of noise, maybe. That was something that...
yeah, that's pretty deep. That's a deep cut right there.
Well, there was a big video, at that time. And
I don't even know anything about the art of noise.
Yeah, close to the edit. It was like an award-winning video that was really bizarre, and it had this little girl that was like leading these men around with a sausage, and then they were beating on pianos. And the first time I saw it, I was just like, this is ridiculous. I was turned off by it. I thought it was too much. But then the second time I heard it, I was like, well, maybe that's kind of cool. The whole lyric of the song was, hey. Just, hey, hey. It was just a sample. It wasn't like the Lumineers or whatever. It was cool. And second time, then the third time I was like, okay, there's something to this. And it was...
and that was the beginning of a...
That was what I called New Wave, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There weren't a lot of ways that New Wave could get to Temple, Texas. And I didn't get the radio stations from Austin, so there were a few things that we latched onto that we could find.
How did New Wave get to Temple, Texas? Just weird music?
Oddly enough, there was a really good record store that the buyers there had really good taste, and they would like certain things they liked, like the Cramps. There were always Cramps records there. There were Cocteau Twins records there. There were New Order records there. So,
and did playing music come before digging into this music discovery thing? I mean, did one precipitate the other, where you were like, I want to try and start making this because you were listening to shit?
I kind of wanted to make records ever since I was 7 or 8, once I could finally put the needle on the record and I had something to do I was a pretty bored kid, and so once I could do that solved a lot of the boredom problem, listening to records and looking at the record covers and just sitting there on the living room floor staring. And so that was kind of where I was, the first time I was like, wow, this would be cool.
And what were those records before Art of Noise?
My dad's records, so... Rolling Stones, the Bee Gees was a big one for me. They were really big right then. Paul McCartney. Was there music that was your parents' music as a kid that you kind of thought you didn't like, that as you've gotten older you realize
turns out to have been very important in terms of your musical evolution.
Yeah, my mom would play the Supremes, and I didn't really like the Supremes at that moment. And 10 years later, I was, in love, trying to write a song like the Supremes. There are a lot of bands like that. I mean, I used to just hate Zydeco music and think it was the most boring adult crap, and I love it now. It's kind of a psychedelic experience for me to go see live Zydeco music. So you
say that you thought about making music from the time that you started, putting the needle on the record.
Yeah.
And so then what was, how did that kind of evolve into actually playing guitar and learning to?
It kind of like...
Because you didn't start really playing until you were sort of in your teens, right?
Yeah. It was a thing that I just would think about, but I didn't really do anything about when I was in middle school. I was, and then even early high school, I didn't really make any effort to learn how to do this thing. And then at some point I realized, if I really want to make these records and I'm this obsessed with music, then, well, maybe I should learn how to write a song. And if I'm going to learn how to write a song, then I should probably learn how to play an instrument. And the first instrument I got was a bass, which you can write on a bass, I guess. I could do it now, but it doesn't really lend itself to that. But I was always listening, when I would listen to records, I was focusing on the bass lines. So that was that's what I wanted to play.
And then did you take lessons, or were you self-taught?
No, right. Never took lessons, and eventually I borrowed a friend's acoustic guitar, and that's when, I would sit down and put on records and teach myself to play rudimentary guitar that way. Yeah.
And what were the earliest songs? What do you remember about the earliest songs?
First song I really learned how to play was a not so great song by the Beatles called "I Need You," off of the Help soundtrack. But that was like I had this little Beatles book,
right?
This little, and that was the one that had the chords that I could play. It seemed real easy. But the Ramones, you could play along to those records.
But when you were starting to write your own songs, I mean, what did those sound like?
Rip-offs of the Beatles and the Ramones and the Pixies,
yeah.
and I remember trying to rip off Caribou by the Pixies. That was one of the first songs I wrote, and I have no idea what it was about, or I just remember it being based on that vibe, and I brought it to my band, in my high school band, and they said it was a little mellow.
What was your high school band called?
It was called the Zygotes.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And I mean, is there anything about the experience of playing in say a high school band or writing those early songs that you retain still, kind of? I mean, in terms of your feeling about it or your approach to it.
I think maybe just figuring out that sometimes was going to take a long time. Not every song comes to you like that. A lot of the songs I've written developed over months, and it really, once I got my first 4-track, I think I was 18, that was when it really started to be able to, it helps to be able to build up a song. That was how I would end up learning to write a song, was by building one up, and you put down some music and then you have different shots at coming up with a vocal, and then that kind of becomes the lyrics and the vocal melody line and all that. So it just I guess what I learned was that it's going to take a second, and all those early songs I wrote were garbage, So when I see, when I later became friends with Conor Oberst, and he was 17 writing these songs with amazing lyrics and quite good chords and that did bizarre little things, I was taken aback. Like, how could he be doing this at this age, But he was doing it since he was 10, or whatever it was,
I mean, I guess the 10,000 hours thing, that classic
that is what
Beatles
it is.
Thing is. So when do you, whether or not it correlates to actual 10,000 albums, when do you feel like evaluating things fairly, you hit your stride as a songwriter? You started to have confidence and feel sort of excited about what you were making?
My second band was called Skellington, and there were some good songs in that band. Not all of them, but there were some good ones, and a couple of them, Spoon even did 2 or 3 of them Spoon did. And there was a song off the Soft Effects EP called Lost Leaders, which Skellington did first, and I knew that was good.
Right. Yeah, and I know that in terms of the band's profile and also from kind of a songwriting standpoint, Girls Can Tell was sort of a watershed creative moment for Spoon. What do you think was that was the source of that kind of being a pivotal creative moment?
Girls Can Tell?
Yeah.
Between the second album, Series of Sneaks, and Girls Can Tell, the third album, that's when we got dropped. I moved to New York City.
Right.
I started listening to the Supremes, started trying to write like the Supremes, and it was Get Happy by Elvis Costello was a big one. I could see where what he had been doing was new wave and sort of punk rock, and then he sort of got on this thing that was very classic and Motown sounding, and I really was turned on by that idea. Before Girls Can Tell, we ran away from reverb, we ran away from room sounds. Everything was just dry, and trying to be cool. Didn't use much piano. If we did, we buried it. But then at that point, then I was like, okay, but I love Marvin Gaye, and I love Stevie Wonder, and I love Creedence, and why not use some of these sounds and instruments that they would use,
Right.
Why play by these cool rules?
Yeah. I mean, I guess there was less adventure in what is now known as indie rock then.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it seemed like it had sort of backed itself into a corner with what was okay to do, what was cool to do, and I was, I didn't see any point. We hadn't really been accepted by that world. I guess maybe Series of Sneaks was our most indie rock sounding record, and it came out on Elektra.
So, I mean, getting dropped, must have been in that way kind of liberating, because suddenly you're like, well, maybe we don't know what people want and should just do.
I thought maybe the band would or should break up, but we definitely didn't have any prospects. We didn't have any tours or anything going on, but but we had local shows, and I kept coming up with more songs just kind of for myself, and I was like, well, we got a show next week, maybe we could play this thing. And then before we knew it, we had 8 songs, and we recorded them real quick, and even though I thought maybe the band should break up, and even now looking back, it looks like that might have been the right move, strategically at that moment. Because we had like a manager and a booking agent that were both, and also a lawyer that were all like, well, I don't know if we can do anything with this band name anymore. Maybe you should start something new. And I saw the point in that, but we just kept doing it. And once we made that record, I was like, well, yeah, but this band made this record, so let's put it out,
Yeah. I mean, obviously, thank God it didn't break up, because it would have stopped just before it started to get really good.
Right.
But what other albums, between then and Hot Thoughts have felt, a la Girls Can Tell, like kind of a significant creative moment for you? I mean, obviously they're all awesome and you love them all equally.
I felt like there were a few. I felt like Kill the Moonlight was a big step away from Girls Can Tell. It was weirder and way more original. It was less Motown, less classic, but it had some great ideas in there, ideas that I was lucky to come up with. And then maybe Gaga Ga had a couple things that were pushing, and then maybe this last record.
Yeah. So what were your first live performances like? Little Britt in the Zygotes.
Little Britt.
What was Little Britt, the frontman, like?
Snotty.
What was your first show you ever played?
I think we played a Battle of the Bands was our first show. And we won, I think. Yeah, we won.
Yeah, you did.
We won. We won. We were a cover band at that point still. We did a Led Zeppelin song, maybe a Jimi Hendrix song. I don't know. I mean, I felt pretty natural at it, but I think it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do on stage and how to have fun on stage.
What performers, whether in bands or as solo artists, are to you the most impressive in terms of their ability to command the stage?
Well, Bruce Springsteen, Prince. Those are the best.
Yeah, the least self-conscious, probably, ultimately.
Yeah, the ones that you can feel. You watch them and you kind of feel like this is the greatest warmth of humanity. Watching this,
Right.
that's the ultimate feeling when you go see Stevie Wonder, that kind of thing.
Right.
The feeling of love and positivity. I don't know. That's the greatest I ever feel when going to see shows, is that sort of warmth,
Do you remember...
Sort of spiritual in a way.
Like, did you go to concerts as a kid, or would you go up and see... What was that like? I mean, were there shows to see when you were in Temple, or did you have to go up to Austin to see shows?
You had to go to Austin, yeah. I remember Crocus did come to Temple. That was like the big show.
Crocus?
I didn't go. Shows just didn't come to Temple. But yeah, when I was old enough to get in a car and get down there, I went to go see... I remember seeing Flaming Lips open for the Butthole Surfers on a Thursday night at the Ritz in Austin. Go see Iggy Pop. Yeah, the Smithereens. We were into them a lot.
And so what, you had some pals who you would pile into a car?
Or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And would you stay overnight in Austin?
No, it wasn't allowed. No. Certainly wasn't allowed, no. We had to come right back.
Right.
We were lucky we got to be gone for 4 hours or whatever. The Ramones, we go to see them all the time, because they were always coming through Austin.
Right. Where would the Ramones play?
At the back room. Do you know the back room? I
don't think so.
That's where I saw most of the shows. That's where I saw Iggy Pop and Jane's Addiction and the Smithereens. And
is it still there?
It's,
I feel like I would have been there at a South by if it was...
I don't think it's still there. It was there not too long ago, but it was a metal bar. All the local metal bands would play there, and then they would also have touring bands come through. It couldn't have been more than 500 capacity.
Right.
So like the Ramones were coming in and playing to these clubs that were the size of the Bowery Ballroom.
Oh wow!
It just seems like it would be. Looking back, it seemed like that was an awful small place for all these bands to be playing.
And when you were starting to play music, hopping all over the place here, if you don't mind, were your parents into the I'm going to play music for a living thing, or they were pretty chill with it?
They were pretty hands off about it.
Right.
I still have this letter from my dad and stepmother from when we got dropped from Elektra, and they wrote this letter, sent me a postcard that says something like, when one door closes, another one opens, and inside the card it said something like, it really is time to move on. But something else will happen good, and I still got that somewhere. So they were generally supportive, but I was young, and once it got to a point where I was 28, 29, 30 and nothing was happening, they would suggest maybe I look for something else. Yeah.
Right. And was that something you ever took? Was there a part in your brain where you were making a backup plan? Or what would you have done?
Not really. I mean, I was just trying to make rent,
Yeah.
And so I was substitute teaching. This is when I couldn't get the video game job back. I was substitute teaching. I was doing temp work. And I worked at a very early, internet company thing where I was like basically stripping code out of one thing and putting it into another, making $15 an hour, that kind of thing.
This is once you went back to Austin and weren't in the city anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the last straight job I had.
And then once Girls Can Tell was finished and getting ready to come out,
Once Mac said that he wanted to put out Girls Can Tell, I got called into that job, that internet job, because I was constantly going out to my car and taking naps or being on the phone talking to Merge or whatever.
Right,
I was always away from my desk, and I got called in, and he was right. Like, I wasn't doing the job well, and the next day I quit. I was just like, I can't do it. I went out and bought my very first cell phone, and I went and took a tour. Connor had been asking me to open for him on a tour, and I was like, I don't know if I can do it. I got this job, and so I just said, okay, I'm going to go for it. I don't know how I'm going to make my rent for the next 2 months, but somehow this is going to work. And I kind of felt like I was jumping off a cliff, but I knew I had to do it, you know.
And you went, it was a Spoon tour with
It was
Bright
just
Eyes.
me.
It was just you.
Yeah, Spoon, we couldn't have, you know, there was no Spoon, really, you know.
You've mentioned Connor a couple of times, one of my favorite artists as well, but what other artists sort of from, you know, your era that you've crossed paths with over the years are you most sort of impressed by, their skills?
Well, I think Hamilton Lighthouse was great. I love his voice. I love his songwriting.
What kind of thing tends to grab your attention nowadays when you hear it, as far as new music goes?
Chords and melodies.
Same as it ever was, yeah.
Yeah, kind of. That's always the most emotional part of music for me. Sometimes I don't, you know, and lots of times when you go see live music, you know when you've heard a great song, but you may not have heard a single word, you know. They're up there singing words, but you can't really make it out. But you know when it's a good song.
Do you find that you have to be in a particular frame of mind when you're writing to be, you know, receptive to your own ideas?
To my own ideas?
Yeah, I mean, do you, or just receptive in general to the spirit of letting a song come?
Yeah, it helps to be in a good frame of mind. It helps to be healthy. It helps to, you know, have all your chemicals in the right zone.
Ratios, yeah.
And I'm not saying I haven't written good songs when I was depressed. I have a couple times, but I think that's more the exception. Usually I write better when I feel good and when I feel like, you know, it's really about songwriting for me is just sort of, it's kind of like sitting down, catching a mood and sort of just speaking in tongues for a sec, you know, and I record it and I listen back and if the speaking in tongues sounded good, that's a hit, you know, and I'll work on it. But it's really about sort of just catching that wave, you know, and not being too in your head about it, you know.
And the speaking in tongues part is the melody without real lyrics yet? Is that?
Yeah, it's just this sort of, kind of just doing something and not knowing why, not knowing where it is going, and just sort of poking around in the dark and like, okay, I got this chord, I'm going to sing this. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of, you know, just kind of trying to feel the spirit for a second, you know. Like, I turn my camera on was one like that. Now, I still don't know what I turn my camera on means, but it feels good to me. But that was just kind of when I sat down on the floor, and I remember writing a song on one string, you know, and I had the beat more in mind than anything else. Dung, 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 you know, and that was just the words that came. I turned my camera on. I don't know where it came from. But I liked it okay, you know. Sometimes those words just aren't going to do, and then you got to fill them in with other ones. Is
it ever the case that a song is written about you know, that the inspiration for the song is what is the subject of the lyrics? That you sit down and write about a specific topic.
Specifically have it in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Around Kill the Moonlight, I read this interview with Chuck D where he was saying that all of his songs started with a title. You know, Welcome to the Terradome or Don't Believe the Hype or whatever. All these things started as a song title, and I thought, I mean, that's a good idea. So I started writing down song titles, and then I would start with the speaking. Yeah, I would still do the same speaking in tongues process, but I would have one lyric, and then just kind of go from there and see what happened. You Gotta Feel It was like that. All the Pretty Girls Go to the City, Small Stakes, but a lot of songs right around that era. Yeah.
Do you think that your perspective as a lyricist has changed a lot or remained fairly consistent since Spoon started? Have you noticed kind of
it's changed a lot, and that was another part of the Girls Can Tell story that I didn't mention, was that was right when, for the first time, I said, not only is it okay to play with reverb and pianos and vibraphones, but opening yourself up and being a little more honest and vulnerable. I was appreciating that aspect of a lot of songwriting. The Kinks, I felt like were great at that, and I came along around real late to the Kinks and was just getting obsessed with them right before Girls Can Tell. And so for the first time, before that it was a little bit, lyrics were just sort of like, well, whatever doesn't embarrass me to sing, or something that's colorful, or maybe I can rip off a Wire lyric and that'll be the song, But then around then I started thinking, well, maybe I could just actually write about my life, or write about how, write about people that feel like life has gotten away from them, or...
That's the Kinks for you, right?
Yeah.
The character studies.
Yeah. Lines in the Suit was like that. Song off of Girls Can Tell. That was a big one for me. Because I felt super vulnerable. I felt washed up, And that's where that lyric came from. How come I feel so washed up at such a tender age?
Yeah. What was the big... What album by the Kinks did you connect with the hardest when you were first? Like, where has this been all my life?
Face to Face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then Something Else were probably the two biggest ones.
Yeah, I got Something Else first.
Yeah.
And then Face to Face.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh shit, yeah, Village Green. They're right about that one
right.
too.
And then I got Village Green, and there's a whole, just to be discovering all that music. I think it was the Rushmore soundtrack that turned me onto the Kinks. And I was like, I had a Kinks greatest hits record, and I listened to it a few times, but when that happened, and then there was this weird thing where this website would, if you signed up for the website, you could get a free album, and I was completely broke, so I just kept signing up with a different address each time, and I got a bunch of free Kinks albums that way. It's a great program.
I think that's all I've got for you, Britt.
So
much. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks. It's good to talk to you, as always.
Well, Spoon have a handful of U.S. shows on the horizon in early 2018, plus trips to South America and Europe. You can stay in the loop over at spoontheband.com. Coming up next on LSQ, it's an interview from the year 2000 that I did over the phone while I was working at Rolling Stone full-time with Lars Ulrich of Metallica, a conversation we had just 5 days after Metallica had filed a lawsuit against peer-to-peer file-sharing service Napster, as well as a couple of the universities that they deemed guilty of having helped spread Napster's popularity. You may remember, if you were paying attention at that time, that Dr. Dre was also part of an initial crop of artists trying to figure out how they could deal with this emerging, they thought, threat to their, artistic and financial security. And as you'll hear, Lars makes it clear that, for them, for Metallica, it wasn't about money, because they certainly had enough of it, but was more about kind of raising the discussion and engendering debate on the topic of what do we think music is worth, and, don't we think we ought to be paying for it? And also, I just think it's interesting, listening to that Britt Daniel interview. He talked so much about that summer in 1999 when he almost gave it all up. And can you imagine if he had? And I just think with this Lars interview as well, I enjoy looking back at these moments when it seemed like something, so do or die was happening for an artist. And if you zoom out in the big picture, Metallica are still exceptionally successful. And thank God Spoon didn't break up. Anyway, let's listen to Lars Ulrich. We joined the conversation where Lars is basically explaining why Metallica decided to take up this fight at the time.
This isn't just about, Metallica's masters. This is about the way that people have access to music, the way that people deal with music, the way they choose to play and interact with music. I'm not going to necessarily, say with a complete straight face, this is on behalf of everybody else, because, I think that what we're hearing now is that, there are a lot of other people out there that are starting to sort of feel that they want to join us in this. But it is about, nobody else is going to take the first fucking step. Well, we've never been afraid of taking that first step in almost anything. So it's like, well, let us fucking start this and see what happens, and try and get a debate going, and try and sort of raise the awareness. And the hardest thing about it, and I think one of the most interesting thing about the 5 days now since we served Napster in these universities with the suit, the feedback we get from people and so on, is really the level of ignorance and the level of unawareness of what all this stuff really means. reading, some, comments and, fuck Metallica and boycott Metallica and this and, Metallica has enough money and, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, to sort of the ignorant and the uneducated about this, it's very easy to see somebody sits and goes, this is about, dollars and cents, but it's about so much more. And it's sort of like this whole fucking tidal wave of stuff in its wake. But we really felt that the fact that there's a company called Napster there and that what they provide a service, for people to sit there and download and make their own CDs of first-generation digital masters, that's unacceptable.
Now, I mean, I understand what you're saying when you say it's not about dollars and cents, and is it to your mind more an issue of artistic control then, or what's at the heart of the issue to you? Because I'm sure you can understand, from the kids' point of view, it would be like, well, what? They just don't want us to get them for free? What's the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm probably about as open-minded and as liberal as sort of you're going to find anywhere in contemporary America in terms of tolerance and not judging other people and all this type of stuff. But, so I'm going to say this with that preliminary is that, this is as close to anything that I deal with on a daily basis that is sort of about right and wrong. I hate using those type of phrases because to me, there's a lot of, more to most things than just a right or wrong. But, this is as close as you get in our world to theft.
Right.
And people are basically stealing Metallica music.
Right.
And the story. So one of the greatest analogies that I've come up with in the last couple of days is that people sit there and go, why shouldn't their music be available for free on the Internet? What I say to that is, why don't you, instead of downloading it from the Internet, why don't you go down to your neighborhood Tower record store, and why don't you walk in there and take the Metallica CD and walk out of there and see if you think that constitutes theft or not?
Right.
Why shouldn't Tower Records just open the doors 24/7 and remove the cash registers, let people go in there? I mean, it's the same thing basically. It's just through a different vehicle.
I mean, I guess the question, an issue is, if there weren't the system in place that there is, where, in order for an artist to be able to put out records, they need to get money, and in order for a company to be able to put out records, they need to have people pay for those records. La-di-da, in some ideal world, music would be free, and so would all art, and so would books.
Why should it be limited to music? That's my whole thing, is like, when I read, a guy on the Internet saying, like, I want to have access to Metallica's, okay, fine, what do you do for a living? Okay, I'm a plumber. Okay, well, here's the story. I'll give you my music for free. You come over and fix my fucking toilet for free. The next guy that downloads a Metallica song, he's a car mechanic, okay? We'll make a deal. Here, have fucking Enter Sandman come over and fix my car. Do you know what I mean? Why should art, music, be the only commerce that should have this thing about being available to everybody for free? I mean, that's what I'm saying. You start getting into these, like, huge analytical things that just become like domino effect. It becomes about like the whole music industry. But okay, we've sold a gazillion records and we're fortunate enough to not have any financial issues. But without sort of putting myself on too high of a horse here, I will say that who this really affects the most is not the 1 in a million bands that are fortunate enough to be successful like Metallica, but all the struggling singers, songwriters, and bands out there in all these places that don't have the fortune of being successful and that rely on these small amounts of income that come from their publishing, come from owning their own masters, and come from selling 5,000 records or whatever that can just about pay for the bills that it takes to create this music. And I feel uncomfortable, with all due respect to people I admire. I'm not Tom Morello, and I don't want to be that type of thing. Rage Against the Machine are one of my favorite bands, so I feel a little weird about sort of taking on this sort of crusade type of thing. But there is certainly an element about that we are a band who can afford the legal fees, and we are a band that has a profile, but think of the millions and millions of people that can't. We are not the type of band that sit around and wait for somebody else to fucking take a stand on it, so we jumped out at it first. And
right.
I'm glad we did, because if nothing else comes of this, then these people maybe they will learn something from it and have some different perspective.
All right, well, that brings us about to the end of episode 3 of LSQ. Thank you so much for listening, and a major thanks to Britt Daniel of Spoon for taking the time to talk with me. Thanks as well to the good folks over at Silva Artist Management for making that possible. And thanks in retrospect to Metallica's Lars Ulrich for his candor. Anyway, actually Napster and early streaming services and that kind of thing were my beat at Rolling Stone for a few years around that time. And so I have some extensive interviews with Napster creator Sean Fanning that I do want to share bits of in upcoming episodes of LSQ. There's a lot of stuff from the archives still to digitize, and that audio has its hisses and crackles and pops that I hope you'll find to be, part of its charm or something. Plus, next month, the main interview is actually 2 different interviews separately with Tegan and Sarah. Can't wait for that one. And I've got an interview with Jack Antonoff of Bleachers and Beyond coming up in the next couple of months as well. I'd love to hear your feedback on the LSQ podcast, and, if you have any interest in being part of a street team, I am going to be sending out some stickers and trying to spread the word, so let me know if that appeals to you. You can reach me on Twitter at JennyLSQ. Don't forget to subscribe and write a review and, do all of the things, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much for listening.